Hey there, and welcome. So, when you think about Australia, you probably picture this huge, modern country with tons of wide open space, right? And you're not wrong. But there's this one massive piece of the puzzle that just doesn't seem to fit: the country's enormous northern territory. So, what is going on up there? Let's dive in and figure it out.
Australia has always been seen as this land of opportunity, a place with what seems like endless room to grow. I mean, it's a whole continent, packed with resources and just begging for development. And yet,
And that's really the core question we're tackling. Just look at this map. This whole highlighted area in the north is enormous, but the population is next to nothing. So why? Why, in a world where cities are always expanding, does this giant piece of a first world country stay pretty much empty? Well, the answer is a story about the raw, incredible power of nature. And look, this isn't a new problem. The struggle to settle Northern Australia has a long and pretty brutal history. To really get why it's so empty today, we have to go back and look at the tough lessons learned by the first people who even tried to tame this land. Early European settlers actually had a nickname for this part of the world. They called it the White Men's Grave. Just that name alone paints a really grim picture, doesn't it? This was no adventurer's paradise. For a lot of them, it was basically a death sentence. To put it bluntly, the first attempts to settle here were a total disaster. The death rates were terrifyingly high. The tropical climate was the perfect breeding ground for mosquitoes, and that meant wave after wave of deadly diseases. So the region very quickly, and very justifiably, got this reputation as a place that was just fundamentally hostile to human life. Okay, so let's fast forward to today. Modern medicine has thankfully gotten a handle on many of those diseases, but the climate itself, that remains an unconquered enemy. Living in Northern Australia is like fighting this relentless war on two fronts every single year against two incredibly powerful and opposite forces of nature. And this slide really lays out the two faces of the North perfectly. First, you've got the dry season, which is just beautiful, sunny, pleasant, easy to get around. It's the Australia you see on postcards. But then, the wet season hits and the whole script flips. It becomes oppressive, totally flooded, and you're completely isolated. It is a land of insane extremes. Let's talk about the first front in this war, the heat. And we're not talking about a few hot summer days here. This is a constant, draining barrier of heat that basically dictates what you can and cannot do up there. They have a name for it, the productivity killer. And honestly, it's the perfect description. It's not just about the number on the thermometer. It's this punishing combination of intense, beaking heat plus suffocatingly high humidity. That duo doesn't just make you feel a bit warm. It actively saps your energy and your ability to get anything done. The real-world impact of this is huge. Human productivity just tanks. Any kind of serious manual labor, the sort of work you need to build cities, roads, or run giant farms, becomes almost impossible. The climate itself is a massive roadblock for the very industries that would bring people there in the first place. So let's say you somehow manage to deal with that oppressive heat. Well, then you have to face the second front, the seasonal deluge. When the wet season kicks in, the sky just opens up and dumps a volume of water that's almost hard to wrap your head around. And again, this isn't just a quick thunderstorm. We're talking about a months-long siege. From about November all the way through to April, the whole region is completely redefined by water. Life isn't just adapting to some rain, it's ruled by it. For almost half the year, the main feature of the landscape is just floodwater. To give you some perspective, the amount of rain we're talking about is comparable to the Amazon basin. Just pause and think about that for a second. One of the wettest places on the entire planet. That is the kind of rainfall Northern Australia gets year after year after year. And all that rain creates this intense cascade effect. First, the rain just doesn't stop. Pretty soon, the ground is totally soaked and can't absorb another drop. All that water starts running over the land, causing rivers and plains to swell until the entire landscape basically turns into one giant, shallow inland sea. And the impact on modern life is just staggering. Roads literally disappear, major highways become rivers, entire towns and communities become islands, completely cut off from the rest of the country for weeks, sometimes even months at a time. So when you start putting all these pieces together, the deadly history and this modern climatic war, a very clear picture starts to form. This isn't just an empty spot on a map. It's a land that has actively and pretty successfully resisted being conquered by people. In the end, Northern Australia isn't empty because of just one thing. It's the result of this perfect storm of massive barriers. You've got a historical legacy of disease, a modern, year-round siege of energy-sapping heat, and an annual, catastrophic flood that just washes the world away. All of this leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. As we look to the future, should we see Northern Australia as the next great frontier, a final barrier that we can break with enough technology and engineering? Or is its wild, untamed, empty nature a powerful warning from the planet, a sign that maybe some places are meant to remind us that we have limits? It's definitely something worth thinking about. Yeah, we're looking at Northern Australia. It's this massive territory that kind of feels forgotten by its own country. So the big question is, why? What is it about this huge, resource-rich coastline that keeps people away?
I mean, the scale of this place is just staggering. We're talking about over 2 million square kilometers of land. It's this vast, untamed wilderness.
And to really wrap your head around that number, think about this. You could take France, Germany, the UK, Japan, and Italy, smush them all together, and Northern Australia would still be bigger. It's basically a continent within a continent. And yet, for all that space, this massive territory is home to only 420,000 people, and most of them are clustered in just a couple of small cities, places like Darwin and Cairns. It's honestly one of the most sparsely populated regions on the entire planet. So, right there, that's the paradox at the heart of our story. Australia is famous for its packed coastal cities down south, but this northern coastline, which is just as huge, is this great void. So why did one side flourish while the other just stayed empty?
Okay, so to find our first clue, we've actually got to go back in time. The answer isn't just about today's economics. Nope, it's buried deep in Australia's colonial history and in the choices made by the very first European settlers.
See, when the British first arrived, their number one goal was just survival. Simple as that. They had to set up a colony that could actually function and sustain itself. And that meant finding a climate that felt, well, familiar. A place where their crops, their animals, and they themselves could actually thrive. Just look at the latitudes here. It tells the whole story. All the successful early cities, we're talking Sydney, Melbourne, they're all in the temperate zone, way down between 33 and 37 degrees south. But the north, with cities like Darwin sitting at 12 degrees south, that's deep, deep in the tropics. We're talking a climate more like Thailand or the Philippines. And you have to remember, for 19th century Europeans, that kind of climate wasn't just uncomfortable, it was literally deadly. Before modern medicine came along, the tropical north, with all its humidity and mosquito-borne diseases like malaria, was known as the white man's grave. It was considered a total death trap. And the results of that choice, they're crystal clear. While southern cities like Sydney and Melbourne absolutely boomed, every single early attempt to plant a settlement in the north ended in total disaster. They were just defeated by disease, by isolation, and by a completely hostile environment. But, it wasn't just about the climate. The sheer tyranny of distance created a barrier that was almost impossible to overcome. And that brings us to our second big clue: isolation. The distances we're talking about here are just hard to even comprehend. You've got 4,000 kilometers separating the northernmost city from the country's economic heartland way down in the southeast. It just created this profound, crushing sense of isolation. I mean, think about that for a second. That's like driving from Paris to Baghdad. It's a journey across continents, but it's all happening inside a single country. For centuries, that kind of distance made logistics, trade, and even just basic communication between the north and south an absolute nightmare. It completely stifled any chance for growth. And what's really striking is what Australia doesn't have. The great economies of the US and Europe were built on these massive navigable rivers. Think the Mississippi or the Rhine, that act like natural superhighways. Australia has nothing like that to connect its vast interior. And to make matters even worse, nature threw this enormous, impassable barrier right in the middle of everything. We're talking about a series of massive, arid deserts that basically cut the continent in two. It made any kind of overland travel economically and physically impossible for generations.
So this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, the North's climate today. Because it's not just tropical, it's this brutal cycle of extremes. It's so intense that it makes any kind of large-scale settlement or industry a constant struggle, even with all our modern technology. Okay, so from about November to April, the North has its wet season. But this is not just a bit of rain. This is a full-on, catastrophic monsoon that just dumps over 3,000 millimeters of water on the region. To put that in perspective, that's 5 times what London gets in an entire year. And the thing is, the dry, hard-baked ground just can't absorb that much water. So the result? We're talking biblical-scale flooding. Roads completely disappear, infrastructure gets washed away, and entire towns are literally cut off from the rest of the world for weeks on end. Then, after the floods, you get this period they call the buildup. The temperature just sits around 35 degrees Celsius, but the humidity cranks up to 80, even 90%. It is this relentlessly oppressive, suffocating combination that makes any kind of sustained outdoor work just about impossible. Yeah, this punishing heat and humidity creates what they call a feels-like temperature that regularly soars past 50 degrees Celsius. That's 122 Fahrenheit. In those conditions, manual labor isn't just hard, it's downright dangerous. So when you put all these clues together, you've got the history, the geography, and the climate, the mystery of Australia's great empty north, well, it really starts to make a whole lot of sense. You see, it's not just one thing. It's this powerful, self-reinforcing combination. It started with a historical decision to just settle somewhere else. Then that was made worse by crushing geographical isolation. And the whole thing is locked in place by a relentlessly, punishingly hostile climate. So for more than 200 years, these forces have defined Northern Australia, shaping it into the vast, empty expanse we see today. And that leaves us with one last fascinating question to think about. In a world where climates are changing and populations are shifting, will this great empty space ever be truly conquered? Or is it destined to remain forever a testament to the raw, untamable power of nature?